Obviously, with this being a recreation, I'm curious about how things worked with the copyright and the IPs there.
So so the original illustrations were done by quite a famous artist called Angela White, who was responsible for putting together the London Dungeon logo. If you see if you ever get a chance to see the visuals of the original game, it'll probably bring the logo to mind, particularly the box cover. There's quite a lot of similarity there. Robert didn't actually own the IP to that artwork. So that was never an issue. It was never really in question. And on top of that, I did actually want to have new artwork done anyway. It was an area that I felt could do with being updated a little bit. Although I do have to confess, I love the original artwork. I think if you see it, it's quite, particularly the board, it's quite bright and it's quite gearish, but it's a product of its time. You know, that's a board game that was designed in the or illustrated in the 90s. You know, so I always felt like that was something I wanted to update and change, and I needed to anyway. So that was fine. In terms of the copyright for the game and the intellectual property of the game, my understanding is that you can't copyright the mechanics of a board game. So that was never an issue, but there was an issue around the name of the game, because the Gothic game, obviously I wanted to call it the Gothic game, and I maybe call it the second edition or whatever. But the problem is that you may have heard of the Gothic series of video games or computer games on the PC. They own the copyright to Gothic in relation to games and playthings, which is the classification that board games fall under as well. And so I did reach out to them to see if they would mind me using the name The Gothic Game, but the consequences of them changing their minds, I mean, they didn't actually get back to me, in truth. I could never involve them in any kind of serious discussion about it. So again, it wasn't really an option. So the only choice was to just do it anyway, or to change the name. And I didn't feel comfortable with just doing it anyway, because, you know, I'm sure they would have found out, particularly if the game is as successful as I hope it is. And so the choice was to change the name. And so we've added Damnation in front of it. So I've managed to get to copyright Damnation as the name of the game. Interestingly, the Gothic people, they picked up the name after it lapsed on the original Gothic game. So Robert used to own it, but unfortunately it lapsed and was picked up. So, I mean, it's an interesting topic within games. I see a lot of people talking about, do I need to copyright the name? And some people will just flat out say, no, you don't. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at big board games, they do get their names copyrighted, and they don't do it for fun. They don't do it because they don't need to. The reality is that if you don't own the name of your game, you are subject to kind of legal action in the future if you release a game that clashes with another game. That's the reason to copyright. And so I felt, given the investment that I'd made in terms of my time and my finances and all that kind of thing, I'm someone who likes to play it safe, knowing that the community don't look fondly on people that issue kind of threats around intellectual property and copyright and things like that. It's not enough certainty for me. So I just wanted to take matters into my own hands. It is an expensive process, but I took legal advice on it, and the advice was, you know, don't take any chances with it, you know. So that's why I took out the name, and I had the name trademarked.
I'll add to that as well. Something that's worth bearing in mind for anybody looking at working with existing intellectual property, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the people who own that intellectual property and find out what they exactly own and where the boundaries are. We're constantly talking about boundaries of things. as Kris mentioned, owning the name can sometimes be different from owning the artwork, can be different from owning the designs for the miniatures, for example. Like those can sit with different people, so that's worth bearing in mind. Another thing that's very important is considering not only who owns it, how do they own it, how long for, where do they own it. They might own the name, but only for certain territories. Do they own the merchandising rights for those things? How long do they own them for? And it's about striking a deal so that what you want to do, if possible, in an ideal world, is just circle around your entire property if you can, and make sure that you own everything. But that isn't always the case. You need to work out what is right for you. I have friends who have worked with the Warhammer license, for example, and they were really, really scared because it was such a huge property. And it's about working really closely with the people who own the IP and understanding where those boundaries are and where they work for you. Because if in 6 months' time, if Kris wants to release an expansion, he would have to think about whether he has the rights to release an expansion under his contract. If Kris wants to release in a year's time plushies based on Dracula from his game, he needs to look at whether or not he owns the right to the appearance of the plushie, but as well as the merchandising itself, the name of the plushie. There's so much to think about that is more than just, here is the name.
And this is another, this is where when you're looking at this stuff and you're trying to understand what these legal things actually mean, you're just reminded that you're a world away from where you started, which was you just want to make a game, and this is how broad it is. If you're doing it, essentially you're driving it yourself. There's an awful lot to learn, but anyone could do it. I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it. There are a ton of resources out there to help with it, and there are loads of board game groups on Facebook and community forums, things like that, where you can go, and people are so helpful and so happy to help that it's just about understanding, I suppose, that you're going to need to know about so much, in order to take it from beginning to end.